Hello and welcome. My name is Ray Gerard. I'm your host for our program today, and with me is Michael Hichborn. He is the president and founder of the Lepanto Institute. And if you don't know what the Lepanto Institute is, you're going to find out. We're coming to you, this is a production of SJEN TV, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri, the Rome of the West. Now, Michael, as I understand it, you are the president and founder of Lepanto, which was formed when?
The 2014, the end of 2014 is
End of 2014. Mm-hmm. And before that, you served 7.5 years.
For the American Life League, that's right.
It's American, their Defend the Faith project?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the American Life League, it's a pro-life.
It is a pro-life organization dedicated to defending life from the very beginning all the way to the very end. So they fight abortion, contraception, euthanasia, all that stuff, yeah.
Okay, terrific. And let's see, your background, you have a bachelor's degree in political science.
And economics.
And economics,
yeah, that's correct.
And a master's in education.
Mm-hmm.
And you live in Virginia with your wife and 6 children with one's on the way. All right, well, God bless you. In any event, so tell us a little bit about the Lepanto Institute. What is the goal? What is what is the purpose of the organization?
Sure. The Lepanto Institute was founded because when I was working at American Life League, what I kept finding was that there were institutions within the Catholic Church that were funding the enemies of life. They were actually giving grants to organizations that were, propagating contraception or trying to advocate for the expansion of abortion, and it didn't make any sense to me. So as I continued to look into that thing for American Life League, it became clear that this was kind of a full-time project in and of itself, and so we agreed to part ways, and I started the Lepanto Institute to continue looking into those organizations and individuals who were claiming the name Catholic, but were actually working directly against the Catholic Church.
Can you give us an example,
Sure.
at least an example or several examples?
Well, the very first example, and this is where we got started with this, was the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, which is run by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The Campaign for Human Development has an annual collection in November, and they say that it's an anti-poverty program, and they're trying to get to the root causes of poverty, but it was founded in 1969 by 2 men, a man named Monsignor Jack Egan and Saul Alinsky. Now, Alinsky is a name that's probably well known to many very conservative Catholics and Christians because it was Alinsky who has been the inspiration for people like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and several others who have been very forceful in pushing the agenda for abortion, contraception, and everything else. Well, the campaign was started in '69, and the idea was to collect funds from within the Catholic Church to give grants to community organizing groups. Mm-hmm. And these community organizing groups, they ostensibly were fighting racism, poverty, for immigration reform and that kind of thing. But what wound up happening is that these groups, most of them were very much radical groups that were fighting for socialist causes, but they were also getting involved in the march for abortion and the expansion of access to birth control and that sort of thing. And throughout the time, so from the 70s all the way through the 80s and 90s, the CCHD had continued to get a very bad reputation as people were discovering more and more what they were doing. So in the late 90s, they tacked on the word Catholic. It was originally the Campaign for Human Development. Now it's the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Mm-hmm. But they don't fund anything that's Catholic. They don't do anything that calls for evangelization. They don't do anything that actually would work toward the salvation of souls. It's all political agitation. And so that was one of the very first groups that I started looking into because I started finding that a very large number of grants, and we're talking millions of dollars, were going towards organizations that themselves were promoting contraception, abortion, homosexuality, and Marxism.
Well, I mean, as you said, ostensibly these organizations were for good, Catholic purposes. In other words, trying to help help the poor in the inner cities, for example,
Right, yeah.
and so forth. So why, well, in your view, why does the CCHD provide funding to organizations to do this sort of thing? I mean, I know, for example, that the CCHD agreements that they use with these recipients calls for the recipients to uphold and abide by fundamental Catholic teaching. But as you're saying, a lot of cases they don't necessarily do that. So why does the CCHD then, in your view, continue to do this? Is it simply because they don't want to confront the problem head on? That they, perhaps, they, you'd be marginalized. If we're trying to keep as broad an outreach to people in our community as the church. I mean, why do you think the CCHD still does this sort of, this sort of funding?
Right. Well, it's a multi-tiered problem. On the one hand, you have the grants that are coming through bishops who themselves are very much aligned with a particular agenda. And I don't want to call anybody out in particular, but let's just say that we do know that there are bishops who have been involved with the homosexual movement, for instance. But it's not just them. It's not just the bishops. You also have the bureaucracy, who is primarily run by people who are very poorly catechized. They don't really understand the tenets of the faith. They don't really understand the moral teachings of the faith. And I'll give an example. Very recently, the CCHD gave a $750,000 grant to an organization called the Ignatian Solidarity Network. And this organization has these annual conferences geared towards high school age students and college students. And in these conferences, they were promoting transgender ideologies, they were promoting homosexual identities, that people should be coming out and being proud of the fact that they were, in fact, living a gay lifestyle. And when we found this grant, I went ahead and I published an article showing this is what this organization is doing. It is actually in direct violation with the Catholic teaching on sexuality and the family. And the CCHD gave them $750,000. The CCHD finally gave a response to one of our supporters who forwarded it on to us. And the response, boiled down, was, well, this doesn't really violate church teaching, because what these conference talks were about was inclusivity and making sure that we weren't giving any kind of unjust discrimination against a certain set of people. But what that, see, this is where the poor catechesis comes in, because what the CCHD in its response was leaving out was that same portion of the catechism also says that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered and can in no way be supported or endorsed or accepted. And so they're forgetting that part, but saying, no, we have to have this advance against unjust discrimination, which means inclusivity in their mind. So it's that poor catechesis. Another part of this problem is that you have people in the administration of the CCHD who are actually very much integral to the agenda that we're talking about. And the prime example there is Ralph McLeod. Ralph McLeod is the executive director of the Campaign for Human Development. He came into that position in 2007. He came into that position right after he gave a ringing endorsement and agreed to be the campaign treasurer for a woman named Wendy Davis. Now, a lot of people will probably remember Wendy Davis is the politician who wore a catheter on the Senate floor in order to filibuster pro-life legislation. Now, this came after she was put into office and after McLeod's endorsement and everything, but the point is, if he was so blind that he had no idea that she was that radically pro-abortion, and I don't believe for a minute that he didn't know, but if he was so blind to that, then how could he possibly know what these other organizations are doing, or even how badly they are promoting these agendas that are contrary to church teaching? So they're blind, they have no real understanding of church moral teaching, and then when they do come into that understanding, they want to err on the side of, well, inclusivity and they're helping the poor, so we'll just kind of turn a blind eye to the bad things that they're doing.
So what is the, so I take it when you find these things out, you approach, for example, the CCHD and ask them for some type of response?
This had been done up until about 2013. I had several very large reports, 200 pages plus, where I would go to the CCHD. I actually met with McLeod and John Carr and several other people at the USCCB offices. And I went page after page after page explaining everything to them. And they never gave us anything in return. There was never any, wow, that's really bad, we're going to go ahead and defund them. It was, we'll look into it. And then they wouldn't do anything. They didn't defund any of the groups that we gave to them. They never followed up with us. And so we would publish our reports, and then they would call that an attack. They would say, oh, you're attacking us. Well, we're not attacking you. We're just letting people know where their money is going. Because if you're going to ask people in the pew for money, I think they are owed a full explanation as to what else these organizations are up to.
So when you were in this lengthy meeting with them, did they give no reaction? Did they say anything? I mean, do you have any reaction? I mean, do they agree with the points that you're making, at least the principles that you're?
They kept everything very close to the vest. They didn't really give any kind of indication as to what their personal thoughts were about these groups, except to say, oh, well, we would never fund an organization that's against church teaching. And then, of course, there was their other default. Well, all of these grants are approved by the local bishops. So they're going to hide behind the bishop's skirt in order to say, well, it's not us who's doing it, it's the bishop. So they're throwing the bishops under the bus. When most of the time I'm finding the bishops are in the dark on what these groups are actually doing. But then when we expose what they're doing and we put out a report, those same bishops are silent. So there's kind of a dual problem on this whole front. Now, pinpointing exactly what the cause is, that's a little bit trickier. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, it could be a combination of things, I would imagine. Obviously, the culture is one that makes it difficult to stand up for traditional Catholic teaching these days. So, what are you finding in terms of response to having this information put out? You're doing this work. You're finding these issues, and you're spreading or shining some light on some of these things. What kind of response are you getting? Do you find, do you have people that, you must have donors?
Sure.
So I mean, how would you describe, the kind of effect, or maybe gauge your own success? What kind of response do you think you're achieving?
It depends on the audience. I mean, obviously, the people who support CCHD are going to sit there and scream and yell and say they're a bunch of liars. Hichborn's a liar. But we have a lot of people who look at the situation. They say this is awful. Why on earth are the bishops funding an organization that is not only not Catholic, has no interest in evangelization, and is involved in something as vile as teaching kids about homosexuality or pushing a contraceptive agenda? When you have this kind of thing going on, most parents, I'm finding a lot of Catholics who are, my age and younger, who have young kids, they're outraged. They're absolutely outraged, and they should be, because the Catholic Church's sole purpose, the reason we have the faith, is to draw souls to Christ. But what the bishops are doing, we're talking $10 to $15 million a year being applied toward agitation groups that have nothing to do with salvation and everything to do with pushing an agenda that goes against the Church's teaching. So people are outraged. They're absolutely outraged. I'll never forget, I sat with a bishop and I had my binder of 200 plus pages, and I'm turning page after page and showing him all the evidence of all the things that are going on with the CCHD. And this bishop's jaw just got lower and lower to the ground as I'm going over everything. And he says, Michael, this is awful. What should we do? And I mean, this was at the beginning of my investigations, and I was kind of taken aback by that, because I was thinking, Your Excellency, I'm nobody. You're the bishop. I mean, you're the reason I came to give this information. All I did was dig it up. I'm not the one to put together an agenda and to say that this is how things need to be done. You're the bishop. You have authority. I don't.
Well, has authority, but obviously, even people in leadership positions in the church, they're still only human. Everybody needs advice and good ideas.
Sure.
Everybody's looking for ideas.
Right,
something
right.
that something that we can use, and so that's very interesting. Well, obviously, there's like that bishop. There's got to be a number of good bishops
There are.
in the country. So I'm sure you run into them as well.
Oh, you bet. You bet. I've met with a large number of very good bishops, including of happy memory Bishop Morlino from Madison, Wisconsin, who was very, very good about the way the situation with the CCHD was handled. So a number of bishops had actually stopped taking up the collection, and some of the other good bishops, God love them, they'll allow the collection to be taken up, but they don't endorse it, they don't promote it or anything like that. So it's kind of a soft backing away instead of an actual severing, which it's a pastoral approach. So
I mean, instead of defunding the CCHD, wouldn't it be better to try to reorient? Yeah.
We've proposed that. Part of the result of the investigations that I'd been conducting was in 2010, the CCHD was forced to undergo what they called a review and renewal. It was just a reshuffling of the deck chairs on the Titanic, but the end result was that they had to reevaluate who they were giving money to, how the grant process worked, and what the guidelines were going to include. And because they had to ask us for recommendations, they wound up adopting one where we said CCHD grantees may not be involved with coalitions where the coalition's agenda is to promote something that goes against church teaching.
So they adopted that.
So they adopted that as a guideline. But, it does no good if you're going to adopt guidelines and ignore them.
So, I mean, I mentioned a number of these organizations that are funded by the CCHD, they probably do some good and then some bad, but you're telling me that there are some there's probably some that do some good for their local communities, but maybe have, some of the money. I mean, some of the money might go for a good purpose and some of the money might go for a purpose that we would disagree with. But what you're telling me is that there are some organizations that are funded by the CCHD, or maybe it's not a 50-50 split, it's maybe more of a, it's more heavy on the.
You bet. There's a group in New York called the New York Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. This organization has deep ties to the Communist Party. They have their own LGBT outreach organization. This group has also pushed for contraception, and they were a part of the whole Black Lives movement, and they were having these big marches where they were saying, talking about the police being overly brutalized, and as a direct result of their marches, there were some police that were shot and executed by agitation, people who were agitated by their agitation.
Now you're getting into
actions have consequences.
Now you're getting into the Alinsky territory
That's
with
right.
agitation. So I mean, obviously there are still like a lot of good bishops. Like I'm thinking, for example, I believe his name is Thompson. I hope that's correct, but he's the Archbishop of Indianapolis.
Oh yes.
And the Brebeuf High School story that just came out. So he's obviously standing on firm, principle. And he's got a lot of people that are disagreeing with him, a lot of people that are Catholic.
Sure.
And so we've got this problem where there's a division in the church between people who take, what would we say, the orthodox or conservative viewpoint on things, and those we might say are taking the liberal view. Other people might categorize it as heretical in a sense or what have. So how do we mend the church instead of? I mean, I know your purpose seems to be let's get the information out to promote the discussion.
Right.
Because I take it what you're saying is, look, if these things happen without anybody looking at them, that in and of itself is a problem.
Right. Well, I look at it the way a surgeon would look at performing an operation. If all a surgeon did was open up the patient and then take out the diseased organ, but never sewed up never sewed up the wound, well, it would be just as egregious as if he had done nothing. So what has to happen is there has to be that meticulous reparation. And this is why we pray for reparations. This is why we say our rosary for reparations, why we do the first 5 Saturdays of reparation. This is why we do the first 9 Fridays of reparation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It is very important for us to put out the information, to diagnose the problem, and to beg our bishops to really do something to excise the diseased organ. But we also have to be making reparations. If we're not making reparations, we're just leaving an open wound.
Well, it would seem to me anyways, that a byproduct of what you're doing should be an honest discussion. It seems like what happens now, I was laying out, the condition in the church today might be, well, we've got a division where you've got a camp on this side and a camp on this side, which is, again, you mentioned Saul Alinsky, which is, what he proposed.
Right.
And so we have this discussion, and it's our culture today, where instead of arguing ideas, what this person said versus what this person said, and everybody takes sides, instead of having an honest discussion about, is this true? Is this not true?
Right.
And if you're, bringing up these issues about the church, or people in the church, segments of the church, funding this or funding that, can't we all, maybe the healthy healing process would be, well, let's have a discussion. Should we fund this? If that is that activity that's being funded, is that right? Is that wrong? You talked about poor catechesis. Just educate the people, have an honest discussion. Wouldn't that, because then that goes against this polarization.
Sure. That's a big part of it. Another big part of it is this is a very hard thing to say, but the fact of the matter is we have a lot of priests who were raised in seminaries or brought up in seminaries where the social justice gospel was really all they got. And so they are part of the problem in that their push for this social justice agenda is so ingrained in everything that they do that it becomes the lifeblood of what they're trying to accomplish in their parish.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing, and I think that open discussion it's very necessary and it's very important, but reorientation is the most important thing. The church's purpose, as we said in the beginning, the church's purpose is to draw souls to Christ. If the conversation is simply about 2 sides of a political spectrum, we're never going to get anywhere. We have to say, if the church is focused on these worldly, earthly things, but is not oriented towards Christ on the cross, as St. Paul said, I preach Christ crucified. If that's not the point, what is? Then why are we even Catholic? Why are we even here? That's the conversation that needs to happen, because, we can talk about the issues. Well, is there a line here? Is there a line there? Everybody's always going to be looking for the line. It's not about the line. It's about what are we looking at? Where are we walking towards? What is it that is going to be accomplished at the end of the day? And what's going to be accomplished is I'm going to be having a conversation with my Lord and Savior at the very end of my life. I'm going to have to make an account for everything I've ever done and said in my entire life. I'm not going to be saved or damned based on whatever banner I marched under or whatever cause I fought for, but whether I loved our Lord above the things of the world. And that's it.
One of the things I used to like tremendously about John Paul II was that he would try to engage or get people engaged in a deep public discussion. Yeah. For example, this monumental work that came out called The Theology of the Body is a collection basically of 179
Something like that, yeah.
Lectures he gave, just his addresses, to the audience in Rome as Pope. And over like 179 weeks, he kept talking about this. And so he would, to a crowd of people, he's talking about deeply theological concepts, right, and explaining to them, as you say, engaging in the catechesis. But it's hard to do.
Very.
It's hard to do.
It's hard to even find a starting point because a lot of these people aren't even told that the Catholic Church is the sole deposit of truth and everything else is either a perversion of truth or is a lie. That only the Catholic Church leads to salvation. And if that's not a starting point, well, what is? You know, you have to keep going back and back and back. It's very difficult to find those starting points.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is, you know, points of commonality, points of common ground. So, but this whole idea of a public discussion, is that something that you're saying, well, that would be for other people to carry forward? You see your job is basically just somebody who just, you know, I'm just getting out the information? Is that how you look at it?
Primarily, I mean, when we do the CCHD investigations, the primary goal is to tell people, look, this is what these organizations are funding. You should have full knowledge before you are asked to give in the collection plate. So if the CCHD is giving to organizations that are pushing abortion, contraception, birth control, and homosexuality, and you're okay with that, well, I'm not really okay with that. I think you should reevaluate where you're coming from. But we want people to have full knowledge. We want people to be able to go into a collection with eyes wide open. The same thing with Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Medical Mission Board, and a bunch of other organizations that we've investigated as well.
I mean, your website, and by the way, what is your website?
It's lepantoin.org.
So if anybody wants to find out more information about your organization, they can go.
Absolutely.
Go right there. And you rate them according to those categories?
Yes. So we rate them on whether they are promoting abortion, contraception, homosexuality, Marxism, and if they are advocating any of those things, we mark them not safe. If they are clear on all things, we mark them as safe to donate to. And so I think we've evaluated some 33 different organizations so far with regard to that. And every single organization that we've evaluated has a link to a full report that details everything that we've found on that particular group and explains why we do not recommend that people give them money.
I was just going to say, like, how is it that you go about trying to find some of this information? What is it, you know, how do you come up with your assessments, and what information do you typically look at?
We look at primary sources, which means their own website, their own grant functions, anything that, you know, a formal document, a formal statement, anything about their leadership of that particular group. We look at everything, all of those things, and we evaluate whether the organization is complicit in the promotion of those things from their own documentation.
Okay, and you give these organizations an opportunity to, you know, respond, you know, before you make an assessment, or do you?
You know, typically, if it's a Catholic organization, we will give them an opportunity to respond. But when it's a case where it's so blatant, where on its own website it says, "Hey, we're out there with Planned Parenthood and we're trying to push for abortion," there's no need to ask for a response. They've made it very clear that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we are here with Michael Hichborn, the president and co-founder of the Lepanto Institute, and he's been telling us all about what their mission is. You know, the investigative work they do on various Catholic organizations, revealing a lot of information that otherwise people would have no way of knowing. Right. So obviously you're a man of zeal and commitment, and so that's why we're glad that you joined us here today. We're going to break right now for a short while, and then we'll be back with part 2 of this program. Thank you. Well, welcome back to part 2 of our program with Michael Hichborn, the president and founder or co-founder? Founder of the Lepanto Institute, an organization that is devoted to researching and making known a lot of features of organizations that have a connection with the Catholic Church that might be surprising to a lot of folks. I'm Ray Gerard. I'm your host, and so welcome back. Now we've talked a lot about the Institute and the work that it was doing, the work that it has been doing. Let's now talk a little bit about you.
Sure.
This is not something that everybody just jumps into and says, "Oh, well, I'm gonna, I'm I'm going to start up an organization that's going to sort of, poke a prying eye into a lot of, because it can't be easy.
No, it's not easy. But the thing is, this was something that I entered into after a lot of prayer and discussion with my wife. I had been working at American Life League, and things came to a point where it was very clear a decision had to be made. And I talked to my wife I had about 3 days to make this choice. And we spent those 3 days talking and praying and talking and praying. And it was an ongoing, nonstop conversation. And
just so that people understand, so the American Life League supports pro-life.
Pro-life international or a national pro-life organization for the United States, fighting against abortion, contraception, and euthanasia.
And you were the director of a Defend the Faith project.
Yeah.
And so in that role, you were uncovering a lot of what you thought to be or found to be disturbing pieces of information where you had,
That's right.
as I said, these organizations with a Catholic affiliation in some way or another supporting pro-choice type activities.
Pro-homosexual, that kind of thing.
So when you're saying that things got to a point, it's basically after you've been uncovering a lot of these things, then all of a sudden, okay, so now you can please.
So the decision that had to be made was that what I had been doing was most definitely a full-time job. And American Life League thought that maybe I was spending too much time focusing on just that instead of the broader topics and trying to address certain legislative issues, which we were also doing. But there was not necessarily a conflict. It was a question of resources. How much resources are we going to devote to this? Is this really a project of an American Life League, or is this something else? Mm-hmm. And that was the conversation we were having. So after 3 days of discussing this with my wife and praying about it, that morning I was supposed to render a decision and still hadn't reached one. And I'm driving to work and I'm praying my rosary and I just stopped. And I said, Lord, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know, I can't see around the corner. Now you're omnipresent, you have omniscience. You can see exactly where I'm supposed to be. You put me where I belong. Mm-hmm. This is not going to be my decision, because if it's my decision, I'm going to mess it up. So
I know that feeling.
Yeah. So I asked our Lord, I said, you tell me what to do. And I got an inspiration. Call your spiritual director when you get into work and do whatever he tells you. Fine. Not my problem anymore. Hands off. I'll just do that. So I got to work, and the very first thing I did was I called my spiritual director. Mm-hmm. And I told him the situation. He said, Michael, I know you, I know your wife, I know your family, I know your situation. You need to leave and start your own thing.
He came out with a very definite opinion.
It was that clear. It was that clear.
Now, without giving us any names or revealing his identity, how did you connect with a spiritual director? What was this person to you? I mean, was he?
He was our pastor.
Okay.
He was our pastor,
Okay.
and I needed a spiritual director, and
you had been seeing him for a couple
of years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so he was he knew everything about the situation. The thing that surprised me the most was that when I told my wife that I had to make a choice, the very first thing that she said was, oh, well, clearly you have to leave. And that shocked me, because she's the one who's like, you have to maintain a good, clear salary and make sure that we're taken care of, and this was, we're venturing out into unknown territory and really taking a leap of faith. So that night, I went in and I rendered my decision, and so I remained on for the rest of the month. But that evening, my wife and I are talking about it, and then she fell asleep, and I'm still, buzzing with this, what the heck did I just do? and so I was just kind of conversing with Our Lady, and I said, this morning, I got a clear direction while in prayer to the rosary, or through the rosary, and so I said, I'm going to just throw myself at you. You're going to be the one who guides me. I'm going to follow. I had done the consecration to Our Lady, and I said, so why don't we start with, what do we call this thing? And in my mind, I kind of get this thought, Lepanto Institute. And I'm thinking, okay, I like that. You know, Lepanto, Battle of Lepanto.
So you're a history guy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
So Battle of Lepanto, 1571, the Ottoman Turks are pushing into Christendom and they get stopped by the Holy League. Beautiful, beautiful battle that takes place. Victory was won through the Rosary. And I said, okay, so I thought Lepanto, naval, you know, my family history has, you know, Navy history going way back.
Oh, does it?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so I thought, gosh, you know, this is what I need to do. All right, Lepanto Institute it is. And then I got a little bit snarky with Our Lady, and I said, okay, what does the logo look like? And in my mind, a ship surrounded by a rosary, and the symbolism is that the ship represents the naval battle of Lepanto and how it was recourse to the rosary surrounding the ship that drew about the victory. And the reason that the fight took place is that the church was fighting three crises, Protestantism, heresy, and Islam. And that those three crises are the same three crises facing the church today. And the ship also represents the bark of Peter. And so in order to get us out of the crisis, it is going to be recourse to the rosary that brings about the victory again, which will draw about the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. And I'm doing this, going, whoa.
That's a pretty definite image.
And I didn't want to wake my wife up. I finally fell asleep somehow, but the next morning I was the first one up, which never happens. I'm a lazy guy. I like to sleep in. But I was the first one up. I was making coffee. My wife came out and she said, "You're up early." And I told her about the conversation that I had with Our Lady last night. And she said, "Oh, well, you realize yesterday was October 7th. Okay, what does that mean?" She said, "Feast of Our Lady of Victory, Battle of Lepanto took place on that day." And I went, it was not even on my mind.
Yeah.
It never even occurred to me, but there it was.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, okay, you mentioned history. Let's talk about your history a little bit.
Sure.
Your Catholic faith. What do you attribute, your strong Catholic faith to? Were you brought up Catholic?
I was brought up Catholic. My father was Protestant. My mother's he's a convert now. He's brought into the faith in the mid '80s. In fact, I served at his mass, at his confirmation mass.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So when you were a child, I suppose you're going to tell us.
Yeah, when I was a child, he attended mass with us, but he never went up to receive communion or anything like that. So as a family, we always prayed for my dad's conversion. But he did come into the church in 1985, and I think that the most grounding feature, because both my parents were Navy, they were always out of the house. The people who influenced me the most were my grandparents, who moved from Arizona to Virginia to help raise us.
So these are your mother's parents?
My mother's parents, yeah. And I'm going to get a little nostalgic here, but because my grandfather died just a couple of years ago. But my grandfather was very active in exposing communist cells in Southern California in the 1960s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And I sat at his feet and I listened to every story he ever had on everything he's ever done in this regard. And he had done all kinds of reading and research. He had a huge library on the teachings of the church and the foundations of the church and what the church says about socialism, what the church says about all these different issues. And so I just absorbed everything from my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who gave me the zeal that I have. I really attribute him for all of that.
And then you met your wife, and so she, obviously, right now it seems like she's very strong in her faith. Was that always the case?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah.
She also is a cradle Catholic. Her mother is a convert to the Catholic faith. In fact, her mother was converted. The book that converted her was Malachi Martin's book, Hostage to the Devil, which was all about exorcisms. And her mother, who was kind of a nothing, but was searching, said, "You know what? If Catholic priests can do that to the devil, well, that's where I need to be." So,
Okay, so, and I take it you must, rely on this faith of yours when you come up against, some of the difficulties that you have to deal with.
Heavily.
Because not everybody, obviously, in the church, I guess, has a fond opinion of you.
No, this is very true. Well, turning to the faith and turning to Our Lady particularly, and I pray the Rosary daily. I pray the Rosary daily for my family, for myself, for the work that we're doing, for guidance, but also for the people who attack us and the people who I am opposing, not because of who they are, but because of what they're promoting. Mm-hmm. We have to make that distinction that I don't oppose people, but I do oppose ideologies and I do oppose things that will drag souls to hell. Mm-hmm. My zeal really is to see souls drawn to Christ. Sometimes that zeal gets a little bit overemphasized, and I get angry, but mostly it's a righteous indignation when you see people working so strongly for the scandalization of young kids, and it makes me crazy. But yeah, I have to turn in faith to Our Lady, and I pray the Rosary daily. We go to the traditional Latin Mass on Sundays, all of which is geared towards enriching, strengthening, and giving us the graces that we need in order to combat the world.
So I've got to, I think I have to ask this, but this is obviously going to be no surprise to you.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
For example, Archbishop Chaput out of Philadelphia has, according to this particular article, there's an email that's quoted here, but according to this, it says that Archbishop Chaput had said, both Lepanto and Church Militant, another organization that he was referring to, sow division wherever they tread. They are sincere, but also destructive. And so that was his view. So taking that in stride, how do you take that in stride? And how do you maintain, your outlook in terms of, your commitment to what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I look at it this way. The bishops are human, and they, on the one hand, they have the sign of the office and the grace of the office, and we owe them the respect of the office, which I absolutely give. Mm-hmm. I have nothing negative to say about Archbishop Chaput. He was responding in that particular instance to the fact that I had exposed the leadership council of the World Meeting of Families that was taking place in Philadelphia. These individuals who were on the leadership council were themselves active promoters of homosexuality, contraception, and abortion. And in fact, Mayor Michael Nutter, who was the mayor of Philadelphia, was he had an honorary chairmanship of the World Meeting of Families, which meant that he was going to be giving a speaking platform. What I was particularly warning about was that Mayor Michael Nutter was going to use that platform in order to promote an LGBT agenda. And I cited him. I pulled up an article where he said he was going to do this. And I tried desperately to get through the gatekeepers at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia to say, hey, look, this is what these people are doing. This is their agenda. This is what I have found. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't call me back. They wouldn't respond to my emails. I gave them 4 or 5 days before I actually published my article. They would not respond to me. So I published my article. And it was primarily geared towards warning about what Mayor Michael Nutter was about to do, which he in fact did do.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, he did.
You did. I have the video. EWTN was covering the event, and you can hear the 2 commentators gasp when Mayor Michael Nutter started pushing LGBT inclusionism in his speech just before Pope Francis was to take the stage. So when Archbishop Chaput issues a statement like that, I don't know how much information he was given. I don't know if he was told by his communications director that I had tried for several days to get in touch with them. Mm-hmm. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. All I know is that he was giving a statement in exasperation. Now, he talked about zeal, he talked about destruction, and he said that they sow division and they are destructive. There are 2 sides to that kind of a statement. I'm not here to sow division, but I'm also not here to unify anybody with something that is acting contrary to the faith. So that's not sowing division, but that is saying that there is a delineation. We have a definite division. There is a de facto division. Whether I'm the one who's sowing it, I'm not sowing it. I'm just pointing it out. Is there destruction? I don't think that anything's been destroyed. The CCHD is still there, so.
Yeah. And you're here, and you made a trip to St. Louis.
Yes.
Because there's a conference going on in St. Louis as well.
That's right. That's right.
And it's a conference of the
Association of United States Catholic Priests. The short version is AUSCP, and they boast that they are the largest priestly association in the United States. I don't know how true that is. They claim to have about 1,300 members. The association itself pushes a very heretical agenda. They recently, this week, put out a paper calling for the ordination of women to the priesthood.
So it called for, it didn't say we should discuss this. It took a stance.
That's right. It took a stance. In fact, one of the points that it made, it said that the male only ordination is an act of injustice. It is unjust that only men are ordained, which would also be to say that, well, the church has been unjust for 2,000 years. The whole paper, it talks about a misogynistic and patriarchal church that is outdated and outmoded, and it needs to it's all modernism. It's all modernism.
And this is a paper that was put out by the AUSCP.
Yeah. The Leadership Council said that they adopted this paper, so that means it is the official position of the organization. And they put the white paper out for general distribution. In fact, they say at the beginning of this paper that what they want people, the members of the AUSCP to do is take that paper and then start working on spreading that idea to their own parishes. So it really is, what they really and truly are doing is spreading heresy throughout the church. They also push very hard for homosexual inclusionism, and they want married and homosexual priests. They have two organizations that are tabling over there at their conference right now, one called New Ways Ministries and the other called Dignity USA, both of which are condemned by the church. New Ways Ministry pushes for same-sex marriage, as does Dignity USA. They are condemned. They are not, nobody is to have anything to do with them.
So that's the official position of the
Vatican.
Vatican.
Position of the Vatican, yes.
And they've got places at this particular conference.
Correct. Yep. And unfortunately, and this is where things get really bad, you have Cardinal Supich, Bishop McElroy, Archbishop Wilton Gregory. I think I named about 7 bishops that have direct not only participation with the AUSCP, but giving top cover. In other words, they're giving them protected status. In fact, Bishop Stowe, who is from Kentucky, who also has positions at the USCCB at the Campaign for Human Development and several other key positions in the USCCB, he is a member of the AUSCP. He's an actual active member. So when we talked earlier and I mentioned that there were bishops who actually were in line with some of these agendas, this is what I was talking about. And it's very dangerous and it's very disheartening, but we are here in St. Louis primarily to expose and to combat the heresy that's taking place.
So what you're suggesting is, not so much that maybe people affiliated with the church are not combating homosexuality because of a fearfulness or of a weakness, but you're suggesting that some people actually promote this, they agree with this, and they're trying to change the church's position.
The 2 other groups that are tabling at this event are Future Church and a group called Voice of the Faithful. These two, there is a hymn that they sing, and the hymn it's to the tune da 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 da.
Right. Yes, I know. Yeah.
But the words "sing a new church into being," That is their idea. They don't want the old church. They want to have a clear cut. They want to sever us from the past and to start something brand new and to go from there. This is schism. That is the definition of schism. It is also the definition of heresy. It's the definition of apostasy. They are actually trying to lead people outside of the church with the idea that they are somehow still in the church. That's the terror that we're facing.
So, do you have some plans for the future as to where you see Lepanto Institute going? Is it just simply going to continue to do what you've been doing, and you're going to work out maybe some other ideas as you go along, being a work in progress, or do you have any kind of particular ideas? I mean, what you're describing, with some people. I mean, if what you say is actually true, and some people have this idea of the new church and actively trying to do that or make that happen, perhaps some other people should, form or make their voices heard as to whether or not they agree or disagree with that sort of thing. I mean, do you have any ideas in terms of Lepanto Institute going forward that, we get into any of that, or you just simply, for right now, what we're doing is what we're going to be doing?
Well, yeah, I'm always open to whatever direction Our Lady wants to take us. For right now, the only orders that I have are to maintain course and bear head. But we do have a number of research projects that are ongoing. I have a very, very major investigation into Catholic Relief Services that we are conducting right now. The documentation that we've collected are over 2,000 pages. We have probably 26 pages of just outline for the investigation that we're conducting on this particular piece. So we are working on that currently, but there are various other projects that we are looking into. We're looking into the future church, the voice of the faithful, and trying to really kind of connect the dots and figure out who all is a part of this push for apostasy within the church. And why are these priests associated with those who are trying to draw people out of the body of Christ? So we have these projects going on. This is what we're focusing on for the moment, but there could come a time where we are asked to do something else, and at that point we'll evaluate and move forward.
Now, who is it in the Lepanto Institute that establishes and decides upon, the direction of the organization? Is it primarily you, or do you have a board of directors?
We have a board of directors. And we have various people who work with us as an organization, but I am, of course, the face of the organization, and so I represent those who are not present, and we'll kind of put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, when you have your your board meetings, I mean, is there a discussion at all about whether you continue to do things the way you're doing them, or whether you change the direction a little bit at all?
We're always looking for new ways to approach the material, or whether there's something else that we need to look into. So yeah, there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of decision making with regard to those things. But we do also keep It's like trying to, take a ship from one point A to point B. Sometimes a sudden storm will rise up and you have to make spot decisions and just determine, well, are we going to go this way? Are we going to go that way? And how best are we going to approach the coming issues? Sometimes we have to abandon things that we've been looking into and researching, just because either it's too weighty or it's just not efficacious. But it's all the direction of Our Lady, and so the board, myself, we do have a lot of interaction. We do try to maintain that openness.
So, because I guess what I'm asking is there consideration given to, a concern over being marginalized? I mean, if we quoted Archbishop Chaput, I'm sure there's others out there that say some things about your organization that maybe aren't too kind or friendly. So do you have a concern? Is there a worry, on the board about perhaps being seen as an organization that's marginalized, and perhaps, there's some way, or maybe you should be looking at some way to try to engage more with people in the church?
I don't think so, because The service that we provide, and we do it on a shoestring budget. I mean, we really don't make any kind of money. I could be making a lot more money in the private sector. But the fact of the matter is that this is something that Our Lady asked me to do, and who says no to Our Lady?
Yeah.
And because our work is specialized and because we're so focused on very specific topics and very specific things, we simply have to do whatever it is that we can in order to make the truth known. The results will come where they go. I mean, the results are entirely up to our Lord and up to Our Lady. They will be able to have the material to work with that we provide, and that's all we try to do.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I mean, so you don't know where this is going to end up, but you just, you know,
We just
with
play our role.
faith, just continue to go ahead. So how have you found, you know, this whole experience for yourself personally? Have you found it rewarding? Have you found it, I mean, you know, what's the majority of, I guess, your feeling about what you do, just on a personal level? Is it, like I said, is it rewarding? Is it difficult? More often than not, you just think of it as being difficult, or, you know, how you know, personally do you feel about, you know, this work?
I think this is what this is what I was made to do. All of us have a particular role in salvation history, and you either align your will with whatever God designed you to do, or you align your will with whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that anybody who is doing what God wishes for them to do will find everything to be much more rewarding than seeking their own will.
Yeah.
And I do feel edified by what I do, only because I try to unify myself daily with the will of God.
All right. Well, Michael, I want to thank you very much for being with us here again today. Thank you for telling us all about the Lepanto Institute and the work you're doing. We wish you the very best in terms of, you know, whatever God does desire and whatever He wills for your organization. We wish for that. So we pray for you. We pray for the church.
Amen.
We pray for everybody, all our believers, all of those who believe, and those who are outside the church.
Amen.
So, Michael, again, thank you very much. We appreciate it. It was our pleasure to have you.
Amen.
So join us again. Thank you for being with us today.